trade relationship if your trading partners aren't complying with the fundamentals, expectations of fair trading partners. If they're manipulating the... Mr. President, I'd ask for one additional minute to wrap up.
Without objection.
So we don't live in a perfect world. Other nations like China are more than willing to exploit our goodwill to gain political, strategic, military even, an economic advantage. The time has come to defend our core economic interest. American workers are the best in the world. They aren't asking us for a handout or a subsidy. What they're asking for is leaders who will defend their legitimate interest on the world stage. So far, this has not been done. So I salute Senator Schumer, Senator Brown, Senator Graham, Senator Burr, Snowe, Stabenow, and others who have supported the legislation. I think it's time for us to act, and I ask my colleagues to support the legislation as we move forward. Would yield the floor.
The Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to take those who are following this debate on a little trip through the world of plastic. I'm talking about the world of credit cards, in this case specifically about debit cards, because something happened over the weekend which has changed that world dramatically. And it's important for consumers, retailers, and voters across America to understand what happened. On October the 1st, on Saturday, the rules on how much a credit card company and a bank that issues a debit card can collect every time you use the debit card changed. They call it a swipe fee. Makes sense. You hand them the credit card or you do it yourself and you swipe it through the machine and you pay for a transaction. Back in the old days that I can recall, some people would write out a check. This is the new form of check. It's a debit card. And when you swipe it through the machine and the machine accepts it, the money comes right out of your checking account to the retailer where you did the business. It's very convenient. People are using it more and more. In fact, over half the transactions at most retailers now are done with either credit or debit cards. What the consumer doesn't know is that there is a charge each time that card is swiped. It's called the swipe fee or the interchange fee. And what is it? Well, it is established by the two basically duopoly or monopoly credit card companies, Visa and MasterCard. They run the whole show, and they've been under antitrust investigation in the past. I'm sure they will be in the future. They set the rules. And here's what the rules are. If you run a restaurant, let's say you run a grocery store in near north in Chicago, like Art Potash, who's a close friend of mine, a family-owned grocery store, and you say, well, I have to take plastic to do business, then Visa and MasterCard say, well, then you have to pay each time a customer swipes that card. How much do they pay? Well, it's a secret. Basically, consumers don't know. Individual retailers do. And the individual retailers have little or no bargaining power, as you can imagine, with Visa and MasterCard and the big banks. So we passed a law here over a year ago, an amendment that I offered to the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, which said to the Federal Reserve Board, investigate this. Find out how much it actually costs the bank and credit card company to process a transaction with the debit card. Well, they came back after a long study, and they said, if it uses a PIN number, which some do, it's about 4 cents. If you sign it, it's about 7 to 12 cents. And then they said, incidentally, the average charge by the credit card company and bank for each swipe fee is 44 cents, dramatically larger than the cost of the transaction to the bank or the credit card company. Remember in the old days when we processed checks, it cost pennies to process a check no matter what the face amount was. But today, every retailer faces the 44-cent average swipe fee every time somebody uses a debit card. You can understand that some retailers don't like this much. There's no competition. These banks and credit card companies tell them this is it, take it or leave it. You don't like it, don't use plastic. And it's secret. Nobody knows it except the retailer, the bank, and the credit card company. A hidden fee. And it's a killer for a lot of small businesses. I was in Rock Island, Illinois, and Carl, who is the manager of the Rock Island Country Market, said, "We got a special deal here, Senator. People can come in the neighborhood in Rock Island, Illinois, and in the morning, I give them a cup of coffee and a donut for 99 cents. Pretty good deal in this day and age." Sure is, isn't it, compared to what we pay? He said, "I want to get them in the store." You know what? They turn around and go to the cash register and use plastic. Well, I wasn't breaking even at 99 cents. Now I'm paying 44 cents to some bank and credit card company because people have used plastic. That world changed October 1st, last Saturday. The new law went into effect where the Federal Reserve established the ceiling, the maximum that can be charged for a debit card swipe fee that's issued by the largest banks in America. And the maximum now comes down to about 24 cents. Is this a big deal? Well, it certainly is, because each year now in the economy, swipe fees account for about $10 or $12 billion. $10 or $12 billion in additional charges to consumers and loss of profitability by businesses. And so you can imagine $10 or $12 billion, even after it's been discounted by the Federal Reserve to about half that amount, $5 or $6 billion, has the banks in an uproar. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I guess it's a great honor now, but the Wall Street Journal published a story on Friday, and they had one of their people that they invited in to comment, and he said that this new bank fee that's being charged by Bank of America on debit cards is the Durbin fee. The Durbin fee. The same thing was said by the Chicago Tribune on Saturday. Well, let me say at the outset that I am honored to be associated with an effort to reduce costs to retailers and consumers across America. What we are doing is fair to try to strike some balance in an industry that has shown little or no balance. And one of the worst offenders in this is Bank of America, the largest bank in the United States. Did you see what they did on Friday? They announced that anybody who had a debit card at Bank of America was now going to be subject to a $5 monthly fee because of this reform. What I have said in the media, and I'll say here, is Bank of America customers, vote with your feet. Get the heck out of that bank. Find yourself a bank or credit union that won't gouge you for $5 a month and still will give you a debit card that you can use every single day. What Bank of America has done here is an outrage. Last week, when they announced that they were charging their own customers a $5 monthly fee for the use of the debit card, they went overboard. They are overcharging their customers even for this new debit card reform. But it's nothing new in the history of Bank of America. Consumers across America and the customers of Bank of America are rightfully outraged. It's hard to believe that a bank would impose such a fee on loyal customers who simply are trying to access their own money on deposit at Bank of America, especially when Bank of America for years has been encouraging their customers to use debit cards as much as possible. It is particularly hard to believe this fee would come from a bank with a track record like Bank of America. After helping to drive our economy off the cliff's edge in 2008, Bank of America was happy to accept a $45 billion federal bailout for their stupidity, their greed, and their mistakes. And it was just as happy to take that money and hand out $3.3 billion in employee bonuses in the same year, 2008. Don't forget the track record of Bank of America when it comes to handling mortgages. They picked up this company countrywide, which had issued mortgages all across America that were going bad. And now the record of Bank of America when it comes to processing these same mortgages is equally disappointing. When it's not losing paperwork or refusing to answer the phone, Bank of America is foreclosing on American families right and left. But at least this time, Bank of America is being open about the new charge to its loyal customers. In contrast to the overdraft fees, research fees, swipe fees, and other hidden fees that it charged, this time Bank of America is being upfront about sticking it to its own customers. And transparency is a good thing. It allows customers, as I said, to vote with their feet. Not every bank treats its customers like Bank of America, and consumers can decide whether Bank of America's values reflect their own. Bank of America is the largest bank by assets in the United States. Now it is crying poverty. saying it is forced to hit their debit card holders with this new monthly fee because Congress passed swipe fee reform. I don't buy it. Here's the reality. Bank of America and banks in general are making billions of dollars still with this new reform in the law off of credit and debit card swipe fees. Swipe fees are an estimated $50 billion per year moneymaker for the banking industry. $50 billion. Bank of America alone makes billions from swipe fees each year. But Bank of America didn't earn those fees by competition. Instead, Bank of America receives these billions because Visa and MasterCard, this duopoly that runs the credit card business in America, basically fix these prices, and retailers and consumers have no voice in the process. This price fixing has immunized the swipe fee revenue stream from competition. Well, now that Bank of America is out in the open with this overcharge of their own customers, it's time for real competition to step in. The Federal Reserve found that it cost a bank on average 7 cents to conduct a debit transaction, a signature transaction. It costs a lot less, I'm sure, for Bank of America with its economies of scale. But the Fed found the Bank of America was getting an average of 44 cents instead of 7 cents. You simply can't make that type of enormous profit margin, nearly 600%, in a transparent and competitive market. In a free and fair market, these profits would be competed down to a reasonable level. Without competition, credit card companies, these banks, like Bank of America, will continue to win. Consumers and retailers, and of course now the Bank of America's own customers, will lose. Today I've written a letter to the CEO of Bank of America. His name is Brian Moynihan. And I've told him that it wasn't just me alone, but others have done a little calculation on his $5 monthly fee. And you know what we find out? When they thought that the swipe fee was going to be limited to 12 cents, Bank of America said, well, that will cost us $2 billion a year. Turns out the Federal Reserve said no, it'll be 24 cents. So by our estimates, this new reform of the swipe fee may cost Bank of America $1 billion a year in revenue. Guess what? If you do the calculation of $5 a month on the number of reported debit card holders of Bank of America, they'll bring back twice as much as their projected loss on this new law. They're overcharging their own customers. Once again, twice as much as they should if they just want to cover the hidden fees that they had in the past. That's unfair to consumers. It's unfair to their customers. It's unfair to do it in this tough economy when a lot of Bank of America customers across America are struggling to get by. What I'm basically calling on Mr. Moynihan to do is to justify this $5 monthly fee based on their projected debit card transaction losses and the number of people that they have holding debit cards by their company. I didn't come up with this alone. There's a gentleman by the name of Lazarus, who's a business reporter in California. He was the first one who called it to my attention on the Lair Report on Friday night, and we've looked into it further, and it's clear again, Bank of America is overcharging its own customers. Well, I can just tell you, it isn't the first time. Most people are aware of the fact that Bank of America was sued for overcharging for various fees like overdraft fees in the past, and because of that suit and the possibility of losing it, they entered into a settlement to pay over $400 million for overcharging their own customers. They're doing it again. Bank of America, with this monthly fee, is overcharging its customers again by any reasonable standard for a loss of revenue based on this new law. But the last point I want to make, and I see some on the floor, including a senator or two who may have a different point of view, but the last point I want to make is this. When I was back in Illinois, I stood with the retailers, and I hope that the retailers of Tennessee and Utah will be in touch with my colleagues, and let's hear their side of the story. They have been victimized by these banks and credit cards for too long. What we do with this law is establish a reasonable standard of compensation and now some disclosure about what is being charged for transactions. I want to help small businesses, and large retailers too for that matter, across America. Their profitability, the success of their business, means more Americans go to work. If you want to stand up on the floor of the Senate and defend the Wall Street banks like Bank of America and the credit card companies, be my guest. I would rather stand with the consumers and retailers who've been taken to the cleaners for years and years by these debit card swipe fees. The latest outrage by the Bank of America is a reminder that when it comes to valuing customers, those banks that don't gouge their customers, that don't overcharge for debit fees, are the ones that deserve America's business. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, thank you. I understand I have 10 minutes, and if you'd let me know when there's about a minute left, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President. I actually am here to speak on another topic, but I was glad to hear the comments from the senator from Illinois, and I would just say in general that I think consumers across our country are beginning to see the first of many consequences of Dodd-Frank, and sometimes I think my friends on the other side of the aisle believe that that money just comes from air, but the fact is when you price fix something like we just did, or like the Senate just did through Dodd-Frank, when you price fix something like this, obviously it's going to have the consequences that have been laid out, and unfortunately consumers across our country are going to be paying the price. It's interesting that most of the major retailers that my friend was alluding to are all talking about the profits, the benefits they're going to have from this. So at the end of the day, it's the consumers that are going to be paying the price. We're already seeing that play out. While Bank of America, I'm not here to defend them, this is just the first of many, many, many charges and lack of credit that's going to be part of our American society as a result of Dodd-Frank. But let me say, Mr. President, I came down today to talk about a bill we're getting ready to debate, I understand, this afternoon at 5:30. It's a Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Reform Act of 2011. I probably won't recite that again, but that's the bill that we're going to be having a cloture motion on tonight at 5:30. Let me say, Mr. President, I understand how people across this country are very frustrated about our economic situation. I'm very frustrated. I'm frustrated for the people of Tennessee and the fact that our economy is not showing the kind of growth that we'd all like to see. And I understand how politicians like to respond to things back home by making it look as if they're doing something to benefit the folks back home during this tough economy. Mr. President, and I plan to speak at length on this throughout the week that this bill is being debated. The bill that's going to be on the floor tonight is not the answer. I think most of you know that tonight we're going to begin debating a bill that would call China, in essence, a currency manipulator. And by the way, they are a currency manipulator. I will agree to that. But the response that this bill wants to put in place is to put tariffs on Chinese imports. And what I believe will happen is begin a trade war. And what I'd like to say is, look, this is the United States Senate. I understand that sometimes a hot bill will make it out of the House for lots of reasons, just due to its makeup. I understand that, you know, a lot of times a bill like this comes forth for messaging. Mr. President, what I would say is we're actually playing with fire here. This is something that's originating in the United States Senate. It's a place where typically, you know, things are to cool and we're to think through things. I'm hopeful that we'll have a vigorous debate on this and many amendments because, Mr. President, my concern is that at a time in our country when we have a tremendous, we've had a financial crisis which has led to the type of economy that we have here, where we'd like to see many people in our country have greater and more full employment. At a time when we've come off high energy prices just a few years ago that sucked a lot of life out of this economy. At a time, Mr. President, when the global economy is slowing much due to the financial crisis that is occurring right now in Europe, I think the response that we want to put forth is not to create a trade war with China. I think most of us know that China has been a currency manipulator. They have a managed float for their currency. We'd like to see that rise much more quickly than it has. It has risen about 30% just in the last several years. So the point is, they are making changes. China has an antiquated financial system that has to be changed. It has to be liberated. It has to become more like what we have in this country, and those steps are happening. There's no doubt that people who import, there's no doubt that the goods that come here from China come here at a lesser price than they otherwise would because of the currency float that they put in place in China. I understand that, but that is changing. And the fact is that with a country of $1.3 billion, we have an opportunity as a country, and as their standard of living continues to grow, we have an opportunity to have even more trade with this country. Our exports to China have grown sixfold over the just most recent time. So here we have an opportunity in this chamber very soon to take up 3 free trade agreements with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia, trade agreements that we've wanted to have in place for a long time. Here we are, the United States Senate, a body that is supposed to act with cooler heads. And again, I understand the pressures back home. I have them too. Our state has tremendously high unemployment, much higher unemployment than I would like to see happen. And I know that when I go to town hall meetings, people talk about China, and I understand that. But I think people may be misreading what is in this bill. And I think a lot of people think that this bill is sort of a plaything because it actually gives the President a chance to waive tariffs on goods that happen to come here cheaper because of currency manipulation. But that's not the case. That's not what this bill says. And a lot of people have misunderstood what this bill says. They think that it's sort of a plaything and the President can make it all right. The President, if you will, can be the adult and not create a trade war. But that's not what the bill says. The bill says that that this country has to put in place tariffs on goods coming into this country as long as they're not being dumped into this country. If they're coming at a competitive advantage, we have to put in place tariffs. Now, is this what the United States Senate wants to do today? We've had a tremendous financial crisis. We have high unemployment in this country. We're tremendously overregulated. We're not doing the things within our own country that we should be doing, that many of us have been arguing, to cause our economy to grow. We have a financial crisis that's taking hold and taking root and actually moving in parts to this country and hurting us. The markets are down. And so the United States Senate, a body of 100 people that are elected for 6 years terms, wants to put in place tariffs on a major growing country that we have growing exports to and create a trade war between the 2 largest economies in the world. That's our response. Instead of understanding the best thing we can do for this country right now is to deal with those long-term solutions in our own country and ask this Deficit Reduction Committee to go big, to get $3 trillion, to do tax reform, to do entitlement reform. Those are the kind of things we ought to be doing in this country. Passing a 6-year highway bill, producing American energy, reducing regulations that are impeding our economy and not really helping the country. Those are the kind of things we ought to, but that's the response that the United States Senate, people with 6-year terms that were elected to be the cooling of legislation, not to originate bills out of this body that we know, if passed, will likely create a trade war. Look, it's like this country has lost its ability to see the fact that we're an exceptional country. It's like we're cowering down now. It's like we know what to do, but we won't do it. And instead, now we got to find a boogeyman. Do I like what China's doing with their currency? No. But is it changing? Yes. Is our country putting pressure on China to change? Yes. Is it occurring? Yes. It's going to have to. The middle class in China is going to want access to the kind of goods that our country produces. It's naturally happening. So why would we, as a country, tamper at this time of a global slowdown, tamper with creating a trade war? Mr. President, again, I understand, and I know that many of the senators in this room hear the same things back home that I hear back home. But the last thing we need to do at this point in world history, at this point with the global economy as it is today, is repeat the same mistakes that happened back in the 1930s with Smoot-Hawley. That's exactly the path we're going down. It's as if we don't learn. As if we don't learn from history. Mr. President, I urge all senators to think about this. I understand we're probably going to move to this bill tonight. I do hope we have a vigorous debate. I hope we change this bill dramatically, if not just kill it. But I think senators need to understand, in my opinion, we're playing with fire. Mr. President, this is not the right thing for us to do. We need to be focusing on how we make this great nation, the greatest nation of all times, grow. And we can do that by dealing with our own issues here internally. We know how to do it. And we can do those by courageously dealing with the long-term issues that confront this country. That'll be the short-term stimulus this economy needs. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from
I see the absence of a quorum.
the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. and I ask we move from morning business to the pending legislation.
The morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed on S-1619, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to the consideration of S-1619, a bill to provide for identification of misaligned currency, require action to correct the misalignment, and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the Senate, the time until 4:30 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the following members of my staff be granted and the committee staff be granted floor privileges during the consideration of S-1619. Jane Beard, Sarah Babcock, Daniel Fidler, Sarah Harshman, Madeline Forbes, Laura Jaskierski, Stephen Simpson, Jonathan Goldman, Cosimo Thawley, and Miranda Dalpiaz.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from New York.
I rise today in strong support of S-1619, the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Reform Act. First, I want to say this bill is the culmination of years of hard work and collaboration between Democrats and Republicans. I'd like to thank Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He and I have been partners in this endeavor for over 5 years. We have traveled to China together. We have worked long and hard to try and gain some fairness in the way China treats American industry, particularly when it comes in regards to currency. I'd like to thank Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator Debbie Stabenow. Both made very valuable additions to the proposal on our floor today. And in fact, Senator Brown is the lead sponsor of this legislation because of the strong and good work that he has done. And they both have worked long and hard realizing the industries in their state are at such a competitive advantage. I'd like to thank my colleague Jeff Sessions as well, who has been one of our partners and leaders on this legislation over the last several months, and lead sponsors in addition, Bob Casey, Olympia Snow, Jeff Sessions, Kay Hagan, and Richard Burr, as well as dozens of other co-sponsors on this bill for their work on this issue for many years. I also want to particularly express my appreciation to Chairman Max Baucus and former ranking member of the Finance Committee, Chuck Grassley, for their leadership and work on currency manipulation. We believe that our bill is WTO compliant, and it is in part because Senators Baucus and Grassley looked at our original bill and worked with us on suggestions as to how to change it to make it just as effective, but within the rules of WTO. Mr. President, today we have an opportunity to help put middle-class Americans back to work and, amazingly enough, in a bipartisan way. Today we stand together to defend American jobs against market-distorting, job-killing, exchange rate policies that subsidize foreign manufacturers at the expense of American manufacturers. These currency policies artificially raise the price of U.S. exports and suppress the price of Chinese imports into the United States, undermining the economic health of American manufacturers and their ability to compete at home and around the globe. China is by far, the biggest exploiter of predatory currency practices. But our bill doesn't target China or any one country. Our bill rather says that there will be consequences for any country that engages in currency manipulation to gain an unfair advantage over American businesses. Mr. President, it's been 10 years since China joined the WTO. In those 10 years, the Economic Policy Institute estimates that 2.8 million American jobs were lost or displaced in manufacturing and other trade-related industries as a result of increased trade with China and the Chinese government's manipulation of its currency. My state of New York has suffered some of the biggest losses, with over 161,000 jobs lost or workers displaced since 2001. Accession to the WTO was supposed to bring China's policies in line with global trade rules meant to ensure free but fair trade. Instead, China has single-mindedly flouted those rules to spur its own economy and export-oriented growth at the expense of its trading partners, most of all, the United States. Our economic relationship with China needs a fundamental change. It's not just in currency, although that's the number one issue. On issue after issue after issue, whether it's poaching intellectual property, unfairly and illegally subsidizing Chinese businesses, monopolizing rare earths, not allowing American companies to compete in China. On issue after issue after issue, China is mercantilist, plain and simple. They use the rules of free trade when it benefits them and spurn the rules of free trade when it benefits them. And for years and years and years, Americans have grimaced, shrugged their shoulders, but never done anything effective to, in large measure, stop the Chinese pursuit of unfair mercantilism. 6 years ago, I was in upstate New York, and a steel manufacturer told me, Mr. President, that they could compete against Chinese steel just fine, even with labor costs being lower in China, except for the fact that China manipulated its currency, and it gave Chinese steel imports a 30% to 40% advantage. The owner of the company, 300 good-paying jobs, pleaded with me to do something. I happened to speak to Senator Graham, and he was finding the same thing with industries in his state of South Carolina. And we began our crusade to get China to behave fairly. At first, people didn't even accept the fact that currency manipulation was wrong and harmful to America. I remember at one point, within a short period of time, both the New York Times editorial page, a decidedly liberal editorial page, and the Wall Street Journal editorial page, a decidedly conservative editorial page, both said China shouldn't have to let its currency float, even though it's a tenet of free trade since Bretton Woods, that the way to correct large imbalances in trade is to let a currency readjust by floating. Well, we spent years convincing America, convincing our colleagues that this manipulation of currency dramatically hurt America and was unfair and against all tenets of free trade. And we've achieved that goal. Now the editorials may pick reasons why they don't like our particular bill, but they say, oh yes, we have to deal with Chinese currency manipulation. But when you ask people who say, don't do your bill, deal with it a different way, we say, how? No one has another answer. Now, it was true that our initial bill, introduced 5 years ago, was a blunt instrument to bring attention to the issue. It was our hope then not to pass the legislation. In fact, we allowed cooling off period after cooling off period in the legislation, but rather just simply to get the Chinese to act. But about after 3 or 4 years, Senator Graham and I became convinced that China would not act. When there was real pressure, they might move the currency a little bit, but then they would back off. And the same proved true in other areas where China unfairly treats American industry. And so we came to the conclusion that legislation was the only answer, no one having a preferred or even seemingly possibly effective alternative. And so we worked, as I said, with Senator Baucus and Senator Grassley and came up with a proposal that we believe meets WTO rules. And then, because Senator Stabenow had worked long and hard on this issue, along with Senator Collins, we combined her proposal and our proposal. Hers was mainly focused on the Banking Committee, Commerce Department, ours on Treasury. And then Senator Brown and Senator Snowe, a year or two ago, had an additional proposal, and we've combined all of these proposals into one workable bill that will finally get fairness for American companies. Over the past 6 years, we've been sending a message to the Chinese government about their exchange rate policies. Treasury Secretary, every Treasury Secretary since we began this crusade said, you know what, let me just talk to the Chinese. I can bring reason to them. And they did it with the best of intentions and the best of hopes. And every Treasury Secretary, casting no aspersions on any of them because the fault was China's, not ours, couldn't get progress at all. So, it's down to this, Mr. President. If we want American companies to have a fair chance of competing, this is the solution. Not everyone will agree with every jot and tittle in this bill, but I think the vast majority of my colleagues will agree with its thrust and the need to do more than we've been doing. And for that reason, I am hopeful that large numbers on both sides of the aisle will vote for this motion to proceed so we can begin debating this measure and listen to some amendments if people have ideas as to how to change it. Let me go over our bill. Our bill is intended to give the administration additional tools, this administration or any, to use if countries fail to take steps to eliminate currency misalignment. The bill would prohibit federal procurement of products or services from a country that fails to adopt appropriate policies to take identifiable actions to eliminate currency alignment. Our bill also uses U.S. trade law to counter the economic harm to U.S. manufacturers caused by currency manipulation. The artificially low value of the yuan, economists estimate it's anywhere from 20% to 40% less than what it should be, amounts, as is well known now, to a subsidy on Chinese exports and a tariff on American exports to China and other countries. Under existing trade laws, if the Commerce Department and the International Trade Commission find that subsidized imports are causing economic harm to American manufacturers and workers, the administration must impose duties on those imports to offset or countervail the benefit conferred on foreign producers and exporters by government subsidies. Commerce already has the authority under U.S. law to investigate whether currency undervaluation by a government provides a countervailable subsidy, although it has failed to do so despite repeated requests by industry after industry to investigate. Our bill specifies the applicable investigation initiation standard, so Commerce can't just turn its back on these companies, and it will require Commerce to investigate whether currency undervaluation by a government provides a countervailable subsidy if a U.S. industry requests the investigation and provides the proper documentation. Our bill also clarifies that Commerce may not refuse to investigate a subsidy allegation based on the single fact that a subsidy is available in circumstances in addition to export. Mr. President, our bill also uses the term currency misalignment, but it's not just a term. Administrations, both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, have, to the amazement of many Americans, refused to label China a currency manipulator. But manipulation is a subjective standard involving intent. What we do is refine that concept and go for misalignment. We believe misalignment is the appropriate standard. That is not subjective. It's not saying why the currency is misaligned or how or who did it. It's simply saying that it is. It's a narrower standard. It's a standard that is harder to wriggle out from under if any government official is intent on not enforcing the rules that we think necessary to get the Chinese to act. So the bill is carefully thought out. The decimation of our middle class, our manufacturing sector, and the American economy as a whole is due in part to developing countries like China employing currency manipulation and other aggressive mercantilist tactics to tilt the field so much in their favor. In the absence of action by the administration, we have a responsibility to protect the interests of American workers and companies. Now, one of the questions that is raised is our bill WTO compliant? And we believe it is. We have worked hard to ensure it is. The bill provides the President with flexibility to waive any consequences that might have an adverse impact on the U.S. economy. And the bill also continues to allow the U.S. government trade officials to do their job and make the decisions on the basis of facts argued before them. We have talked to many experts in the field, and they, too, believe that our bill is WTO compliant. Now, what do the critics say? No one criticizes the idea that China has manipulated its currency. No one criticizes the thought, the actuality that China manipulates its currency. And almost everybody thinks not enough is being done. The main argument against our bill is not the bill itself, but critics of the bill worry that, oh, maybe this could start a trade war with China. Well, I have news for them. We're already in a trade war with China, and we're losing. China, by its mercantilist policies, on currency above all, but on rare earth and intellectual property, on subsidization of homegrown industries, on exclusion of American exports, where we might have advantage, they're already engaged in a trade war. And the result is that millions of Americans don't have jobs that should. The result is that hundreds of billions of dollars flow out of America into China. And if we don't do anything about this, our country will be hurt badly, perhaps irreparably. Some argue, well, Washington Post did today, that it won't have much of an effect because the industry, if China has to revalue its currency, these industries will go to places like Bangladesh. They're making an argument that's 10 years old, 5 years old, and stale. We're not arguing about labor-intensive industries like clothing or shoes or toys. Those are going to Bangladesh already with the cost of Chinese labor going up. China uses its currency manipulation against our top-notch manufacturers. The large companies say nothing because most of them have plants in China, so they can get around it. But middle and small-sized manufacturers are up against this wall and are desperate for our help. One manufacturer in upstate New York makes a very advanced product that deals with cleaning pollutants as they go through a power system. It's a top-notch product. And this manufacturer employs a couple of hundred people in upstate New York, said to me, China's stealing my stuff even though I have patents and other things on it. They're stealing the method by which we do this. He said, I could live with that if they just stole the stuff and just sold the stuff in China. We're not big enough to export all around the world. But what they do is not only do they steal our intellectual property on this, but then they come back and sell it in America at a 30% discount because of currency manipulation. He said, how am I going to compete with that? There's story after story after story just like that, Mr. President. And when American companies are fighting for their survival, battling subsidized Chinese exports, high-end exports, this is no longer an argument about labor-intensive industries alone. I, for one, am not prepared to raise the white flag on American manufacturing and on American jobs, and neither should anybody else. I know that American manufacturing can compete successfully against Chinese competition at home, in China, and around the world, but only if the playing field is level, and our bill helps to level that playing field. Critics of our bill say that while currency manipulation is an important issue, legislation to address it would ignore the many and growing challenges that we face in China. The critics are wrong. We have no intention of ignoring the range of China's market-distorting practices, the ones I've mentioned before. But in fact, because China was emboldened on currency, which the whole world, Brazil just a week or two ago asked China to stop manipulating its currency. The European Union feels the same way we do. But because nobody does anything, China is emboldened to pursue mercantilist policies in other areas, just recently in rare earths, where they tell American manufacturers, if you want rare earths, you'd be a lot better off sending your plant to China. It's just unheard of. Critics of our bill say that it's unlikely to create any incentive for China to modify its exchange policies. The experience Senator Graham and I have had is when China thinks something might be done, they begin to let their currency rise. But because nothing permanent is done, they go right back to their old habits as soon as the pressure is off. This idea that if we pressure the Chinese, they won't do it, makes no sense, because if we pressure them, they do nothing, and if we don't pressure them, they do nothing. The only answer is concrete legislation. What would those who oppose this bill have us do? What is their suggestion? They don't really have one. Should we continue to sit back and watch while American jobs, American manufacturers, and even large chunks of American wealth just drift away? Should we continue to, as one of my constituents put it, be not Uncle Sam, but Uncle Sap? Well, there are too many of us in this chamber on both sides of the aisle who will not sit back and continue to let mercantilist trade practices continue to decimate American manufacturing and American jobs, middle, low, and high. Nor will my colleagues here in the Senate. Democrats and Republicans are united on this issue. We must take decisive action against China's currency manipulation and other economically injurious behavior. The fact that they manipulate their currency imbalances the whole world trading system. Many economists list it as one of the reasons we had the decline in global trade and the worldwide recession that we've had. We simply have no choice but to right the wrong that China is committing. Any retaliation by China would be further evidence of their unwillingness to meet their obligations under the WTO and the global trade community. And by the way, China has a lot more to lose with retaliation than we do, because if there's one country that gains the most by exporting to the U.S. by international trade, it's China. And they are very, very smart, and they're not going to cut their nose to spite their face. I wholeheartedly support the President's goal of doubling U.S. exports over the next 5 years. But that cannot be done if we don't take concrete action to address the protectionist practices of foreign governments who concede tariff reductions only to replace tariffs with massive currency manipulation, border taxes, and a variety of state subsidies. We will not do it unless we get to the root cause. China's currency manipulation would be unacceptable even in good economic times. At times of high unemployment, we can no longer stand for it. There is no bigger step to create American jobs that we can take than to confront China's currency manipulation. It's not a Democratic or Republican issue, Mr. President. Every one of us has manufacturers, companies that are struggling to compete at home and abroad with Chinese exports with a built-in price advantage. It's not China bashing. It's about fairness and defending American jobs. Mr. President, many of us and most Americans are worried. What will things be like 10 and 20 years from now? Will America stay the leading economic power of the world? Will our children have a better life than we do? The number one thing we have to do is change things at home to make that better. There is no question about it. But very high up on the list as well is making sure that China no longer unfairly sucks millions of jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars of American wealth to its shores. What China does will make our job of keeping America strong, of having the next generation live a better life than this generation, far more difficult unless we force them to change, because they won't change on their own. Passage of this legislation will lead to real consequences for countries that unfairly manipulate their currency. We've waited a long time. We've declined to move the legislation at the request of 2 administrations. But patience, not of us, but of the American people, has worn out. I ask my colleagues to stand up with us on S-1619, to stand up for American manufacturing, for American jobs, for American wealth, to stand up so that our children can have a brighter future than we have. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I've enjoyed the remarks of my distinguished friend from New York, and as we begin the debate today on the important issue of exchange rate misalignment, it is an important debate, though I seriously question its timing. Let's step back for a moment. At the end of last month, the U.S. Senate approved legislation renewing and expanding trade adjustment assistance. We need to be clear about what this program is, a big government spending program of dubious value, but one that is important to President Obama's union allies. Not surprisingly, given the heft that labor unions wield in the liberal political coalition, this government spending program is President Obama's top trade priority. So much so that he was even willing to abandon our allies in Colombia, Panama, and South Korea unless he secured this additional spending. To get more government spending for big labor, the President was willing to hold up the three free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea that everyone knows will grow this economy and create jobs. I was happy to chat with the trade representative just a few minutes ago, and he told me that they are going to send those 3 trade agreements up today, and that they should be here between 4 and 5 o'clock. I'm really happy about that because it's way beyond time to get them here. But Americans need to remember this episode when they hear the President talk about his commitment to job creation. Put aside all the talk, and it is clear where the rubber hits the road. The President will prioritize government spending over private sector job growth. Still, because of the President's insistence on this spending program, the TAA bill is likely to pass the House and become law. So here's my question. Given that we just debated a trade bill that we knew would likely become law, why was this currency bill not considered in that context? I can only conclude either that the administration opposes the currency bill and therefore asks that it not become part of TAA, or that consideration of this bill is merely a political exercise with little expectation that it ever will become law. With millions of Americans out of work and the economy stagnant, the people of Utah and all of American citizens deserve more than political grandstanding. Regarding the substance of the issue, the manipulation of currency values by major trading partners in order to gain unfair trade advantage represents a genuine threat to U.S. jobs and to rebalancing of the global financial system. For many years, and continuing into the present, that threat is a reality. There is virtually no unanimous agreement among international analysts that there exists large-scale, prolonged, one-way intervention in exchange markets by some of our important trading partners in order to limit or preclude currency appreciation, primarily in China, but also in some of the other economies as well. There also seems to be little question that China manipulates its currency in order to subsidize its exports. The bill before us seeks to address exchange rate misalignment specifically and global imbalances generally by sharpening the tools available to counter currency manipulation by a trading partner. Of course, any additional tools that we construct must be carefully crafted to align with all of our international trade agreements and global rules of trade. The issue of China's currency has been with us for far too many years. We have repeated discussions about how to address the lack of appreciation of China's currency, followed by diplomatic bilateral discussions, assurances of moves from China to allow appreciation, some modest subsequent appreciation while the political heat is on, and little change thereafter once the heat subsides. This approach does not seem to be working. We've had large and persistent bilateral trade deficits with China, and those deficits continue. We have relied on China's massive excess savings to finance our growing debt, and we have worsened that reliance given the debt-fueled spending spree of the current president. China's dollar-denominated reserve holdings, which have grown for many years, have ballooned from around $1.9 trillion when President Obama took office to over $3 trillion, according to some recent estimates. This is a 50% increase. The currency misalignment by China is not the only source of global financial and economic imbalances. If the President looked in the mirror, he would see his own responsibility for global economic uncertainty. Our budget deficits have far exceeded $1 trillion for the past 3 fiscal years. For 2011, the deficit is expected to be around $1.3 trillion, which is an unsustainable 8.5% of GDP and the third largest deficit in the last 65 years, exceeded only by deficits in 2009 and 2010. Deficits of this magnitude have not been seen since the years surrounding World War II, when virtually the entire economy was being directed by the federal government. Given our budget deficits and the China currency issue, the important question is, what is being done? Let's look at what is being done with a bit of recent history for context. Back in 2008, then-candidate Obama wrote the following to textile organizations, quote, "The massive current account surpluses accumulated by China are directly related to its manipulation of its currency's value. The result is not good for the United States, not good for the global economy, and likely to create problems in China itself," unquote. Now, he went on to promise that, if elected, he would use all diplomatic means at his disposal to induce China to change its foreign exchange policies. He promised to beef up U.S. enforcement efforts against unfair trade practices. Also, back in 2009, during the Treasury Secretary's confirmation hearing before the Senate Finance Committee, now Secretary Geithner stated that, quote, "President Obama, backed by the conclusions of a broad range of economists, believes that China is manipulating its currency," unquote. Those are strong words. Yet once in office, the President and Secretary Geithner failed to follow up those words with action. The administration promised to usher in an era of change, but failed to change the way the U.S. deals with the China currency issue. The Omnibus Trade and Competitiveness Act of 1988 requires that the Treasury Secretary report on exchange rate policies of major U.S. trading partners. Under the Act, Treasury must consider whether countries manipulate exchange rates for purposes of preventing balance of payments adjustments or gaining unfair trade advantage. The evidence clearly seems to show that China's current policies amount to manipulation, leading to an unfair advantage in international trade. Candidate Obama agreed during his campaign. Treasury Secretary Geithner agreed during his confirmation testimony. Yet as Treasury Secretary and as President, the two have refused to act. Secretary Geithner has issued 5 foreign exchange reports, but has refused to label China as a country that manipulates its exchange rate for the purpose of gaining unfair competitive advantage in international trade. Let me repeat that. Despite many bold claims about using all the tools at their disposal to counteract China's trade policies, the administration refuses to designate China's policies as being consistent with currency manipulation for trade advantage. Now, the question that I and most of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle have is, why? Clearly, the administration must recognize the consequences of China's manipulation for American workers and manufacturers and for the stability of the global financial and economic system. Why then is the administration protecting China by refusing to designate it as a currency manipulator? Under the Omnibus Trade and Competitiveness Act, once a country is so designated, there are no draconian actions required. The immediate repercussions are merely stepped-up monitoring and greater vigilance and dialogue. Those don't seem to be things that would lead to currency or trade wars. So why doesn't the administration act? After all, American jobs are at stake. American workers can compete with any workers in the world, but our workers should not have to compete against foreign firms that receive massive subsidies. If the President is as intent on focusing on job creation in America as his campaigning suggests, then why has he refused to take such a simple step as designating known, existing currency manipulation? There is a severe mixed match here between political rhetoric and action. My fear is that the administration's over-reliance on overseas funding, in particular from China, to finance their exploding deficits, is preventing the President and his officers from acting on behalf of the competitive but struggling American workforce. It is well past time for the administration to recognize the negative consequences of China's manipulations for American workers and manufacturers and for global stability. Even though there has been only tepid support, even on the Democratic side of the aisle, for the President's much-touted jobs plan, there is bipartisan agreement that Congress needs to take significant actions to address the massive jobs deficit this nation is facing. We face a national crisis in having unemployment persisting at over 9%, with elevated numbers of the unemployed suffering from long-term bouts of joblessness, and with many American workers having become so discouraged that they have simply dropped out of the labor force. According to statements by the Majority Leader of the Senate, the focus on jobs is precisely why we are considering the bill before us. According to one of those statements, the Majority Leader is reported as having said that, quote, "I don't think there's anything more important for a jobs measure than China trade," unquote. I'm starting to think that my friends on the other side of the aisle are like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. The Majority Leader thinks that addressing China trade is essential to job creation, but based on its failure to use existing tools available to designate China as a currency manipulator, the administration apparently disagrees, or it would have long ago used its authority to make such a designation under the Omnibus Trade and Competitiveness Act and then acted on the problem. The President's focus seems to be elsewhere. He seems to think that at least as important for jobs as the issue of China trade identified by the Majority Leader is his so-called American Jobs Act. Advertisements by the Democratic National Committee and campaign speeches by the President since he announced it in a joint session of Congress last month tell us quite clearly that we should, quote, "meet our responsibilities," unquote, and consider that act, quote, "right away," unquote. Yet my friends on the other side of the aisle apparently believe that a political debate over China and its currency policies are more important for job creation than the President's American Jobs Act. If the President's Act is, as advertised, so crucial for job creation in the face of our national unemployment crisis, why is Senate Democratic leadership delaying its consideration? Why not consider the legislation right away, as demanded by the President in his campaign speeches and Democratic National Committee advertisements? We are told by the President that Americans who are out of work cannot wait until the next election for us to act boldly for job creation. So why are we not considering this American Jobs Act, unless my Democrat friends disagree with the President that the act would be the most important job creator available to us today? I really don't believe anybody believes that. I suspect that they know that the $447 billion in new stimulus spending included in the President's jobs bill and the accompanying proposals to impose $1.5 trillion in new taxes on a sluggish economy is economically counterproductive and a surefire political loser. I must say that the President's Jobs Act looks like more of the same debt-fueled stimulus spending cloaked under the guise of, quote, investment, unquote, along with higher taxes, cloaked under the label, quote, tax reform, unquote. And while I may disagree on the particulars of the President's proposal, I do not disagree with his premise that we face a national crisis in our labor markets and that we should be debating measures that will promote American job creation now without delay. We are also told by the President that we must pass our pending trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Jobs are at stake, he says, as with the political campaign rhetoric exhorting Congress to pass the President's American Jobs Act, which the majority leaders opted to shelve until some unspecified future date. The President delayed the action required to get these agreements passed for much too long. Pass the American Jobs Act, the President scolds, but we can't because the Democrats' majority leader has not brought the act to the Senate floor. The currency bill, which is unlikely to lead to much, if any, job creation before the next election, has come first, perhaps to allow more time for campaign speeches and ads by the Democratic National Committee. Pass the free trade agreements, the President lectures, but they were delayed as they have sat idly on his desk. I'm pleased that the trade leader in the administration called me just a few minutes ago to tell me they are on their way up here today. This currency bill is coming first. What needs to come first is job creation, not electioneering and politics. And I hope before this week is over, we'll turn to those three trade agreements and pass them through both houses of Congress, as, according to the administration, they will be responsible for creating as many as 250,000 jobs. I doubt it'll be that much, but nevertheless, that's what the administration says. That's their estimate. Our jobs deficit is a full-blown national crisis. The unemployment rate has been persistently above 9% since April of this year. It has averaged 9.4% since the President took office. It has been above 9% in 26 of the last 31 months since the President took office. Well, 26 out of the 31 months since the President took office. Despite promises by administration economists that the massive debt-fueled stimulus, which will cost over $1 trillion when all costs are included, would keep unemployment contained below 8%. And the unemployment rate is even higher. The underemployment rate is even higher at over 16%. Once you include, for example, people who want to work but have become so discouraged that they no longer look for work. Nearly 14 million workers are unemployed, and the number grows when you include discouraged workers. The number of long-term unemployed workers has been at record highs. According to census data released last month, those in their 20s and 30s are suffering from the highest unemployment rate since World War II. The enthusiasm of young citizens in 2008 long ago gave way to disappointment and disaffection. Our joblessness crisis is nothing short of a crisis for liberty. When American men and women do not have jobs and opportunity, their freedom to make lives for themselves is eroded. Yet we are to understand that in the face of this historic crisis, there is no more important issue regarding jobs than our bilateral trade with China. Again, I agree that we need to address the issue of currency manipulation and our sustained and large trade deficits with China. However, let us be clear that dealing with issues related to China involves only one bilateral trade relationship. The trade and current account problems facing the United States and the global financial trade and economic imbalances that everyone faces are not solved by addressing this one trading relationship. That is one reason I will be offering an amendment to this bill calling for multilateral and plurilateral negotiations to address currency misalignment. If we are going to succeed, we need to look at the big picture and work with our allies to counter China's current practices. I will discuss my amendment in more detail soon, but hope it will receive strong bipartisan support. Our trade imbalances are not with China alone. Rather, As part of the problem of saving too little, the U.S. has multilateral trade imbalances which require more action than focusing solely on one bilateral relationship. According to recent data from the United States International Trade Commission, the U.S. has trade deficits with nearly 100 countries. The U.S. saves too little, and that problem will not be solved solely by passing the bill before us. Make no mistake, the legislation we are considering can provide useful tools for addressing concerns about China if the administration actually uses the tools. But those tools alone are not sufficient. If we try to address our multilateral problems by putting pressure on China alone, without attending to our lack of saving and our own role in generating trade deficits with nearly 100 countries, the Chinese piece of the U.S. imbalance will just migrate somewhere else. This bill is not a magic bullet to solve our problems or the problems arising from global imbalances, and it almost surely is not the highest priority piece of legislation if job creation is to be our focus, is truly our focus. The U.S., for its part, contributes to global imbalances by persistently saving too little. Following the financial crisis, which was precipitated partly by large run-ups in household indebtedness, American families have tightened their belts to save more and repair their own balance sheets. It is the U.S. federal government that has been missing in action to restore national savings, reduce our federal debt, and promote global balance. Rather than repair the federal balance sheet, the administration has chosen to run trillions of dollars of debt-fueled deficits and borrow ever-increasing sums from abroad, including China. And rather than facing the fact that the federal government has a spending problem, the President is advertising and campaigning on a new American Jobs Act stimulus and tax hike platform containing even more spending and short-term debt accumulation. We are told that it will be in the interest of the American people to borrow more today in order to spend more on infrastructure, for example. The stimulus proponents say, interest rates are low, so let's ramp up borrowing right now. That's the same approach the Senate took when it voted to extend and expand trade adjustment assistance. They ignore, however, that piling trillions more onto our national credit card issued by China and our other creditors moves us that much faster into the company of the Eurozone countries who now face default and elevated interest costs. While federal borrowing rates are low today, what happens when global markets tire of our profligacy and debt-financed spending and begin to demand higher interest compensation? As Spain and Italy have seen recently, low interest rates are not guaranteed, and the interest rate environment that you face can pivot on a dime and escalate rapidly. Borrowing at low rates today sounds great until you wake up tomorrow and are forced to finance at more punitive rates. More debt-fueled government spending beyond our means is sure to drive us rapidly down the road to the stagnation and debt crisis we are seeing today in Europe. Of course, the President claims that his new stimulus and tax hike proposals are all paid for, but the payments are largely promises of future austerity. And anyone who has paid attention knows that federal government promises to go on a spending diet later never lead to fiscal weight loss because future Congresses are not bound by today's promises. It is interesting to hear the President's persistent calls for more debt-fueled infrastructure spending. Presumably, given his interest in job creation, quote, right now, unquote, the projects he has in mind will be more shovel-ready than the readiness of the previous stimulus projects, which turned into something that the President found so funny that he joked about it. Of course, it is no joke to jobless Americans who are stuck with the stimulus debt bill. We heard in early September from the chairman of the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness that the Council identified, quote, 10 high-priority infrastructure projects, based on their potential to put Americans to work right away. Projects that have already been funded that are being held up by regulations, unquote. The Jobs Council says it will work with the administration to try and get the projects moving. Let me repeat that the projects, quote, are being held up by regulations, unquote. This comes from the chairman of the President's own Jobs Council. Yet when some on the other side of the aisle are reminded that the regulations are holding back job creation, they recoil in disbelief. If there are 10 large-scale infrastructure spending projects ready to go and already fully funded and are only being held up by regulatory review lag, I urge the President to act, quote, right now, unquote, to get those projects underway in the interest of job creation. Make one fewer campaign appearance and use that time to expedite regulatory review and get those projects going if, as should be the case, he believes that job creation is more important than politics and wishes to act on that belief. We've also heard the President remarking on how, from a global competitiveness perspective, the U.S. should borrow more today and spend on what he generically calls, quote, infrastructure, unquote, which, as it turns out, can be anything from paving a road to doling out money to solar panel makers. The President cited in his infrastructure advocacy a set of global rankings on infrastructure from the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report. The President seemed to read the report, and its ranking of the U.S. is 23rd out of 139 countries for transportation infrastructure competitiveness, as a call for more spending on whatever it is he thinks of as infrastructure. It appears, however, that he did not read the report in its entirety. If he did, he would have noticed that the ranking is for only one of 9 factors in the report's overall infrastructure assessment. More importantly, if he had read the report, he would have noticed the overriding area identified as the weakest one for the U.S. in terms of eroding our global competitiveness. To quote the report directly, quote, a lack of macroeconomic stability continues to be the United States' greatest area of weakness, ranked 87th. Prior to the crisis, the United States had been building up large macroeconomic imbalances with repeated fiscal deficits leading to burgeoning levels of public indebtedness. This has been exacerbated by significant stimulus spending. In this context, it is clear that mapping out a clear exit strategy would be an important step in reinforcing the country's competitiveness going into the future, unquote. There you have it. The report that the President data mined to find a number to use to support more stimulus quite clearly says that declining U.S. global competitiveness has come from fiscal deficits exacerbated by stimulus spending. And it clearly says that the solution is to exit from our unsustainable fiscal path. That means reining in the runaway debt-fueled spending, not more spending. Before turning to the legislative process on the bill before us, let me post a trail marker for our deliberations. The currency bill we are considering includes reliance on exchange rate models used by the International Monetary Fund. Those models allow for macroeconomic effects on currency valuations of fundamental changes in policies of trade partner countries. For example, if the United States engages in fundamental tax reform, that would lead to improved growth and reduced deficits and debt. The models considered in the legislation before us have the ability to capture those effects. The marker I wish to set here is a reminder that we should be similarly so inclined to use economic models that allow for macroeconomic effects of policy changes when we choose to make fundamental changes to tax and spending policies. We should be as willing to have our budget scorekeepers use economic models that allow for long-run growth and macroeconomic effects of fundamental tax and spending reform policies as we seem to be here in this legislation to use models that incorporate such effects when evaluating currency alignments. It is good to use economic models that allow for an accounting of growth effects here. Then it should be good elsewhere. I also need to address the process that we will follow in our consideration of the currency bill before us. The bill has garnered bipartisan support. In the interest of promoting a truly bipartisan effort, which the American people would love to see, it is my hope that there will be balance in amendments that are allowed to be considered. This bill has sound objectives, but it is not perfect. I believe that amendments from both sides of the aisle can improve the final product, and as I mentioned earlier, I have an amendment that I believe will improve this bill significantly and help us devise a long-term approach to dealing with currency misalignment. I hope there will be an opportunity for it and others to be considered. I hope they're not just going to lock up the tree again, which is the standard practice around here, by the majority. If this bill is an important bill, and we ought to be able to amend it with important amendments. The overriding objective of the legislation, job creation, is shared by Republicans and Democrats alike. Therefore, it is my hope that amendments from my side of the aisle, designed to promote job growth today and in the future, will be duly considered, allowed, and duly debated. Now, Mr. President, I look forward to consideration of the currency bill before us and a robust bipartisan process which includes consideration of amendments from both sides to promote job creation. As I've said, our nation faces a crisis of unemployment and joblessness that is filled with pain today and threatens erosion of human capital and skills which will negatively impact families and the overall economy for years and years to follow. Let us not have politics and special interests dictate what we consider to promote job creation and economic growth. American workers and families, many of them struggling and in pain, cannot wait until the next presidential election is resolved for the federal government to act to promote job creation. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.